point, I would say, if I were to put a percentage on it, I'd say 70% of people who work in procurement are just arses.
Tom, it's another one of these episodes where we fail or achieve in making the best procurement content in the space.
We'll give it a go.
This week, I wanted to talk about like what the best procurement professionals do, and the reason being, I wrote about this a couple of years ago, and not to have my content head on here, but it's normally on, in that it was really well received, and people seem to really engage with this topic almost more than every other topic, apart from maybe the procurement dinosaurs one, which is more polarizing than this one. And you're experienced, right, Tom? You're a bit of experience.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I'm
Bit.
not as old as you think I am, Daniel, but
Oh, experience and age, Tom.
yeah, true, true.
uh, so, firstly, I was intrigued to just hear your general thoughts on what you think the best procurement professionals have, whether it's people that you've hired or worked with, or maybe the opposite of what you've seen. Because maybe I'll just set some context. How I've always viewed this is has almost been from a negative perspective, which isn't
Mm,
necessarily a good thing. But I look at what the worst people do, and I think, hey, yeah, that's the list of things they absolutely cannot do if you want to be the best procurement professional. And that's kind of where I kind of come up with the ideas about what the best people do. But yeah, just to kick us off, I'd be interested in
yeah,
your thoughts.
yeah. There's one really obvious core thing that I think all good procurement people need to have, and that's kind of a real commerciality. So I
Mm,
know that's really obvious, but that real kind of commercial mindset, and I think that that's sometimes a bit missing from certain individuals because they're so kind of trained in the theory of good procurement, they forget that ultimately they're there to help the business make money and get the
yeah,
best and most sound return on investment. So I think that commerciality as well can sometimes be confused with being a really hard negotiator. It's actually being a really effective negotiator is what I'm looking for. So someone who can see the bigger picture, not just think about ego within a negotiation and, oh, I've got to get the best price, but think about total value. So that kind of touches a little bit on the procurement dinosaurs piece because it's a mindset. But um, I've started with the most obvious, and it's probably the least sort of kind of insightful comment, but I think it's one that is quite often missed: the commerciality that needs to underpin the way that a procurement professional works.
actually, I find the whole commerciality or uh, this point really interesting, and I'll share a little story. Is when I was going through university studying law, one thing they used to say more than any other was the biggest skill you can have if you want to be a commercial lawyer is you need to have commercial awareness. And we were like, what on earth is commercial awareness? It sounds so vague, so just out there in the ether. And in short, it's just having a general appreciation for how businesses operate, run, the objectives of them, how they make money. And typically, the whole point was when you were trying to apply for some of the big law firms across the country, they would have clients because the focus is always on joining an external counsel as opposed to being in-house
Mm.
counsel. You would want to be able to speak to you, whoever's interviewing you, about their clients and say, oh, well, I know you work with Nike or Adidas
Mm.
or you work with Brewdog or whoever, and they have
Mm.
these goals, and I've seen these articles in the press about it. And from an outside perspective, you're showing that you can pull together some of the dots, and
Yeah,
you're starting to formulate in your mind, like, yeah, these businesses have these objectives. I'm going to be a lawyer and I'm going to help them. And obviously, I didn't go down that career path in the end, and I joined a commercial function and focused a bit more on procurement and contract management. And my biggest realization when I got in was like procurement was only a lot of the procurement people were only caring about what procurement needed within
yeah,
the organization. And straight away, I was like, "Oh, this is weird. We're a business. Even if it was government initially, we're still a business, and we're trying to do stuff with the budget of money that we're allocated, and we're trying to bring in some money here. We're trying to do all of these things, but you're thinking about what we're doing in this little tiny bubble called
yeah.
procurement, and you want to do things how we want to do it, but it doesn't actually align to the rest of the business. And I found that time and time again wherever I've gone on to, whether it was as an employee or a consultant, there'd be these people who just sit there in their little bubbles, unaware of really what the business is trying to do, yet they're delivering probably one of the most critical functions of the business, which is working with suppliers, spending loads of money, negotiating, trying to deal with all the planning of goods in, out, or whatever, and they don't understand it. And I was just like, how has this ever how has this happened?
Yeah. Do you know, that's a really good point because you've got to be thinking about what makes this business tick. What does this business need to be successful? So, um, I work in the financial services industry at the moment, and I know um, ultimately that the customer journey, the kind of technology that you company invests in, is going to be fundamental to how we differentiate ourselves versus our competition. So if you don't have that overview, then if you're only focused on kind of micro metrics like cost or payment terms, etc., then how can you really be effective in terms of challenging and changing the business? And one of the key things that I sometimes try to do when I'm interviewing candidates is I get into a conversation about business in general. So I might ask a question around what do you think makes a successful business, or can you give me a couple of examples of businesses out there that you admire? Because I think what that does is it kind of gives an insight in terms of a candidate's ability to be able to recognise the importance of commerciality in business in totality, rather than procurements as a kind of micro function within that.
Yeah,
So
I agree. And just parking the interview stuff aside, I definitely want to touch on that. As in terms of, we've been talking about this idea of the procurement dinosaur, and someone who's a bit hard nosed, is very focused on just these small, like you said. I think you said the phrase micro metrics
yeah,
just then. Uh,
yeah,
and we've got all of these other opportunities. ESG is one that someone just maybe I was just thinking there. Someone wrote on one of my TikToks, is ESG just another version of CSR? But they said it in a way more derogatory
yeah,
manner,
yeah,
of like
yeah,
completely dismissing it. And I think that actually might be worthwhile having a conversation around that point another time. But ESG is one of those value adds. So when we talk about like procurement needs to be adding more value to the business, making sure that we've got ethical suppliers, sustainable suppliers, the supply chain is governing itself in a
mm,
way that matches or aligns to us is critical. And you can only do that with your supply chain if you're aware of what your business is looking for on the ESG front. So you actually have to be commercially aware enough to pick up on this, because my experience of working in companies is at least up to now, and I think they will get better on this front, is this ESG stuff is kind of spoken about in pockets, and it's not
mm,
necessarily like the CEO saying top down, this is our ESG criteria, these are going to be the OKRs for the whole company, and then procurement or supply management or whatever your team's called, your OKRs for this quarter need to come from these ones.
yeah.
And I don't think we're quite there yet, or at least I've not seen it in a lot of the companies I've been working in of
Yeah,
late.
ESG
Uh,
is a dangerous one because I think it can be very easy to become a bit of a tick box exercise in terms of, oh, here's the
yeah,
key things that we need to tick off to make sure that we've complied. But actually, that comes back to the overall business context. So, what ultimately do we need to do, not just from a business perspective, from a customer journey perspective, and the vision for the business and the vision for the environment as a whole? Well, actually, that means that you've got to have a much kind of broader mindset than just looking at ticking certain things off on a contract kind of tick box. So I think that plays into there's a difference between the micro and the macro, and that's coming back to the point on what makes a good procurement person. They see the macroeconomics of the business as more important than those microeconomics of what they're looking to deliver as a function.
yeah, yeah. I like that. And the box tickers. How do I this is one of the worst traits, and it's
Yeah.
something I will look to weed out in any interviews. Like how do we avoid bringing them in the first place? But equally, in a lot of teams, there will be people who in procurement are just box tickers, sadly, because the way our professions worked is like, here's a policy, our procurement policy, here's the process, and both of
Yeah.
those things heavily aligned to ticking boxes and just moving stuff from start to finish. Like, how do we mobilize the team, upskill them to maybe be a little bit? I'm going to use the word agile. I actually think it's probably the best descriptor here for it. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, do you know it's a mindset thing though, isn't it? Because it's about bringing in individuals who are confident enough in themselves and what they can deliver, that they're not just there to kind of fulfill already written promises on policy or processes, but actually that they're prepared to rewrite those policies and processes. They're prepared to
Mm.
be agile, and it's probably an overused frame, but freedom within a framework is what I advocate. So there's a framework for how we should procure, but actually there should be freedom in terms of how we execute that. So I think, coming back to your original question on what makes a good procurement person, they're able to think for themselves, think as individuals, and think about what we need to do to change. And so I think that introspective approach from a person in procurement is really important. That ability to be able to challenge their own processes, their own policies, and say, actually, in this instance, does this work? Or actually, in this instance, do we need to be thinking about things a little bit differently?
Mm.
Self-awareness is a big one, Daniel, because I think so many procurement people have been so almost overtrained. They've almost been kind of, oh, we've got I've done 22 SIPS exams and I know exactly what the
My CB,
frameworks are.
my CPD score this year
Yeah,
is
yeah.
just insane.
But the problem with that is that what that leads to is a kind of a set framework, whereas actually really we need really good creative thinking within procurement. So people who are prepared to say, okay, I know that's how we did things, I know that's how I've been trained, but actually in this instance, and given the environment we're in 2022 and beyond, is that going to really deliver the impact that I want to deliver for my business? Sounds a
Yeah,
bit kind of almost
wishy-washy
uh,
millennialism.
yeah, but
I'm joking.
yeah, no, oh, yeah, exactly. But I think there's a sounds potentially hypothetical, but I I I think mindset is everything in procurement, and
Mm.
this for me when I'm looking at bringing in procurement talent, I'm looking at people who are prepared to challenge themselves, have the self awareness, and are prepared to kind of um, think creatively to get things done and to have a bigger impact.
Yeah, just on the whole interview part, and it's quite cool that we've kind of floated around that piece actually for the last 5 minutes or so. When I was just making my first hire in my last role, I was trying to figure. I was thinking deeply about this because what happened to start with was I wasn't in, I didn't have the team to start with. I was then given the team. Didn't really know that I was getting the team, and the ad was already out, so it had a job spec on it that I didn't particularly like, full of just details of what the type of person was we wanted. And I was like, oh, I've had no input into this, but this person will report into me. They'll be part of my team. I don't like it particularly, but it was too late to go back and reverse all
Yeah.
of this. So I was just trying to figure out, like, how can I get the most out of these people when I start talking to them, or we start doing like the first like screening calls. So effectively, I was just like, these are the things like I want from this person. And coming back to the was it the freedom within a
Freedom
framework?
within
Was
the
that one?
framework, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. In short, it was that idea of we've just spent 18 months building out a greenfield supplier management procurement team. There was nothing before. We've brought our experience from multiple different industries to build out processes. We have a lot of regulatory and customer demands that makes everything way more complex than it needs to be for the types of, to be honest, basic procurement activities that we were doing. But that gives you a whole different challenge because you do need very you need a lot of process, sadly, to govern it. But it was like what I wanted from someone coming in was not to just come in and accept what we had done as that being like the final iteration. I wanted someone to come in and almost challenge absolutely every part of the process. So when they start using it, to have the forethought to say, hey, this I really like this bit, or I really don't like this bit, and this is why, and I think we could change it like this, or I had this issue with the process. It wasn't going to work in this scenario, so I went around the process, did this instead.
Yeah,
It worked really nicely, and almost just for them to come in and be able to do that, have full trust that they can just get on and do that from my end. Like I'll support them. Like if they if they ever go outside of these confines of the policy, well, actually, I want to promote freedom in the first place, but I need someone who can take that freedom and deliver on it, so they don't come
yeah,
back to me and say, "Hey, this has been delayed for 20 days," or like when I look, say when I was like looking in Gatekeeper, no advertising pun there or anything. Like when I'm looking at Gatekeeper and I see like there's a card there that's been stuck in that face for 20 days, and I'm thinking, why on earth is that there? Why is that? What's the blocker there? I don't want it. I don't want ever. I just don't want to see that ever. I just want
yeah,
someone to have that freedom, but also to be able to use that freedom to just get things moving along at all times. And
yeah,
that, for me, was one of the hardest things to find during the interview phase, outside of the procurement tech uh,
yeah,
interest that I had, like because I wanted to also bring people in who had a interest in technology to do the job better. And I was shocked, Tom. I
yeah,
was genuinely shocked by the how almost everyone was like, "Oh, I've never used procurement tech. We use
yeah,
Excel and SharePoint, and yeah, I don't really know what it does." Um,
yeah,
so those two things, working, having that freedom to operate and to take that freedom to make things better or to work within the framework, or to come in and use procurement technology to make our lives better. Like those two, arguably mindsets or
yeah.
experiences there were just so challenging to find.
There's a key word I'm going to use: curiosity. You want people to be
Mm.
really curious about what's out there to make their lives easier and better and more efficient, and to make their impact greater. So I feel that sometimes when I'm uh, looking for candidates, I can find that people are kind of in the comfort zone of what they know, but they're not actually that curious about what's out there. What am I missing? And that actually comes from building a network as well. So I know from speaking to you that there's a load of things that I'm probably missing from a procurement tech point of view, but that's good because I'm thinking, right now, how do I get that? What do we need to do? What environment do I want to work in? And I
Yeah.
think that um, curiosity, but also driving that curiosity through building a network, through listening to podcasts, through staying up to date with what's out there. That's really really key for me, and it comes back to my point on mindset. It's a mindset thing, which probably difficult to get into a role portrait or a job description, but it's a personality really. Um,
Yeah,
and
your point there around curiosity, I think, could easily be included in the job spec, right? Curious
yeah,
about procurement, supply chain. Like you could just have a one liner and leave it quite broad, or you
yeah,
could give more examples, like you keep up to date with the news, keep up with commercial affairs, keep up.
yeah,
You're actively building a network for yourself on, say, a platform
yeah,
like LinkedIn. I guess at the same time that could be twisted slightly, and people will be like, "Well, here's my 100
yeah,
CPD hours from SIPs," which maybe isn't. That's not really what we're talking about. I think that's still good that they are learning something and trying to stay abreast of what SIPs pushes, but
yeah,
it's not the end all and be all of what's out there content wise.
yeah. I just want to add as well. It doesn't have to be just strictly procurement stuff. I mean, you'll
Oh
know
yeah,
that I've got really interested in listening to Ali Abdul, and I was listening to a content about the Oliver Cookson story, who basically built my protein from his own garage. And
yeah,
I worked as head of purchasing for my protein, so I was deeply fascinated myself. The reason I mention that is that comes back to the earlier point I made about being curious about what makes a successful business. How do you build a business? What the entrepreneurial mindset? And so I'm looking for people who are almost prepared to think a little bit outside of their own profession, their own genre, and are able to think a bit more widely about business. And I think that that's only going to make you a better procurement professional, because that means you're going to develop that understanding of what makes a good distribution channel, what technology is required, what does good customer service look like. Um, far
Yeah.
far far bigger impact from someone who can understand those dynamics than someone who just understands cost or payment terms or how to negotiate. Um,
Yeah. No, I
so
I think you're definitely onto something there. It just got me thinking, mainly quite selfishly from my career perspective, right? Like I got to a point in the last year where it's like I feel like I've done what I want to do for now in sort of procurement and contract management as a
you're
practitioner,
too
as a
young.
leader.
You're too young, Dan.
Yeah, well, it's been a while, 7 years. Let's put it that way. Of
Yeah,
just starting off from quite very low down as a grad to getting quite senior
yeah,
quite
yeah,
fast, and
yeah,
I felt like the learnings that I was going to pick up were going to be far less than if I jumped out of the profession to do something else. So, sort of marketing at the moment is great because it natural affinity, product design, other elements, but it still links back to procurement, right? So I was very conscious that I didn't want to leave procurement entirely, but I wanted to step out of it and do something else that links back to it. Uh,
mm,
and whether if I say in 5, 10 years I wanted to go back in, I think I'm going to be far better than I was
yeah.
6 months ago. But you also got me thinking, talking about the other content you consume. Like I like Ben Francis of Gymshark,
Mm,
and
mm,
he was CEO. Then he brought a CEO in because he didn't feel he was experienced enough. And what he did instead was learn his own business again. So we went on lots of rotations within the business to pick up on all these other things. And the reason I'm sharing that is whenever I've worked with people, when they say, oh, yeah, I've been in procurement for 20, 30 years, and I think, geez, that's longer than I've been alive. Almost every I'd say 95% of them work in the same way, which is in a silo within
yeah,
procurement. And I'm not saying that to be mean to them or anything. And some of them are still incredible and they operate within that silo still in a brilliant way. But I think it becomes increasingly more difficult for them to pick up on the nuances and the changes of what's going on in the world, what's going on in their business, in the market, because they've kind of regressed into themselves a little bit over that time. And
yeah,
when I look at my own career, that was everything I didn't want that to happen to my career. And also, Tom, I think another thing is I just want to talk about is that something I value here as well was moving on from
yeah,
companies quite frequently.
yeah.
And the reason being is because you can get siloed within that company and within that procurement team.
100%.
You move somewhere else and you're exposed to all of these other factors, different influences within the market or the business. And straight away, that can just open your eyes and you can learn so much just by maybe moving every 2 to 5 years, depending on what you're comfortable with, or less, right? Depending on your
That's a
career.
great point. I actually spent the first 12 years of my career in one business, but I bought very different categories. So I did
Mm.
progress that way. But um, honestly, probably if I look back at my career, I'd have thought I probably should have left after five. I was kind of in a comfort zone. I think uh, I've got experience of working in hospitality, in financial services, in fashion, in food, in health and nutrition. But coming back to that point on framework, it, there's a procurement framework which is kind of applicable to all businesses, but understanding the nuances within different businesses and what makes procurement impactful within those different businesses is really key, and being able to be transferable with that is really key as well. So I would
Mm.
agree it might not be the most popular opinion to people who are looking to hold on to their talent for a long time, but I would say sort of an optimal sort of 3 to 5 years. You've obviously got to be long enough to make an impact, but reality is, yeah, grow through learning and grow curiosity through understanding different businesses and how they work. You're not going to get that by being stuck in the same company for 10 plus years. So
No, definitely not. And I just, yeah, I'm just thinking like whoever I work with, if they're in my team or if I'm just a colleague, I always say to them like, "What's next for you?" And they often look at me like, "Why the hell are you asking me? Like, what's next?" I'm like, "Well, what's your plans? Like, are you happy in this role, or do you want to go off and learn somewhere else?" And one of the main reasons I do that, especially when I'm new in a team, is just to figure out like what kind of person they are, and to
Yeah.
this I'm just trying to as I'm thinking about this, this could sound awful, right? But I'm just going to say it. Sometimes it's easier just to say it how it's coming out in your brain without
Just
polishing
go
it.
for it. Yeah.
So I will say it, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but I appreciate it may come out. Yeah, one thing I always do is I start not interrogating, but just trying to figure out what this person wants. And the reason being is whatever they tell me, I'll start to figure out whether they're like one of the good ones or one of the not I was just say one of the not so good ones. There's a lot you can learn just from them saying about their mindset, how long they've worked somewhere, and what their level of understanding is about what we're trying to achieve. And then also from just having those conversations, I get to pick up on a lot of their emotional intelligence as well. And I know that's something we kind of focus on, like the mindset piece. But when you couple all of that together, um, the very best, if this person has all of the skills, like they get the business, they get the market, they want to add value, they have a really deep understanding of negotiation, all of this commercial awareness and commercial. How did you phrase it? Tom, at the start?
Commerciality, I think.
Commerciality. Yeah, yeah, that was it. Yeah, they have all of this, but they're an ass, and
Yeah.
their EQ is way
Oh
off.
God.
Straight away, all of that is undone, and I just don't want to deal with people like that. And sadly, over the years in procurement, more and more people, like I found, and I'll be really honest about this, and I've shared a few conversations in DMs on LinkedIn with a few people about this over the last year, and this is typically with men in the profession,
Yeah.
uh, that their EQ is way off. Their
Yeah.
skills are normally fantastic. Their EQ is way off, and it just instantly makes them, in my in my eyes, like the worst person I could possibly work with.
Emotional intelligence. I mean, not only is that a really critical skill set for anyone who wants to get on in business, but I think it's particularly relevant for procurement because your ultimate goal is to influence people. And at that
Yeah,
point, if you're an artist, you're not going to get anywhere. You could be the most skilled, experienced, best negotiator in the land. If you can't convince people that you are have their best interests at heart and you want to work with them to help them to secure what they need for the business, then you're not going to get anywhere. Um, what One of the most pivotal books that I ever read about 20 years ago was the Daniel Goldman Emotional Intelligence book, and it
oh, I
really
didn't know
wrote.
this one.
So Daniel Goldman effectively wrote the kind of
He wrote.
theory around
Yeah, oh,
yeah
okay.
emotional intelligence, and but it you read it and you realize just how game changing critical emotional intelligence is
Mm,
to life in general, to people's effectiveness within life in general, and
yeah.
so I I think it's an interesting one as well because it's something that you can't necessarily put down on paper, but you can really tell within a kind of an interview scenario. You can pick up on cues on emotional intelligence, how people come across, um, and and I would say I would go back to your point. I would say if I were to put a percentage on it, I'd say 70% of people who work in procurement are just arses.
That's such a high percentage, isn't it? Jeez.
But no, I do think there's an
Yeah,
element of
there's a problem.
um, there's a problem. And you can actually tell even if some of the social media content that's out there, you're thinking,
There's this
um,
attitude about
yeah, there's a real
self entitlement.
attitude, yeah, an entitlement thing. Ultimately, you just need to be a decent person who's good to work with, who wants to get things done, and who can be
Mm.
trusted. That that's really
By the business, right? Not just within
yeah
your little bubble of procurement.
yeah
Yeah, no, Tom, I'll share a little personal story real quick because when I first set out in this space, I was definitely, I think maybe I'm
yeah
slightly autistic, which probably doesn't
yeah
help. but my
yeah,
EQ was, I just didn't even care. If I'm being,
yeah,
like, it sounds really
yeah,
poor, but uh, my ability to, if someone someone didn't do something the way that I thought or expected it, and this is when I was really junior, right? And this isn't a
yeah,
millennial entitlement here. It's just my
yeah,
complete lack of emotional intelligence at the time. I would just say like that was awful. Like I would just absolutely go in on it, and it got to the point where I was like, actually, I don't think I'm a very good team player in this space. Like maybe I have a slight ego issue here, or and I don't think it was that, but that's how it was coming across to people. Like I wanted to be like the very best, and I, of
Mm,
course, that's always in my mind. Like I want to be as good as I can at something. But then I started taking that a lot more seriously because I was like, oh wait, I don't mean to sound like this. I just think maybe I'm just lacking on all of these social uh, cues in the workplace. So I had to spend probably a stupid amount of time uh, just trying to figure this out. And I think this is where it comes to your earlier point. Not that I'm trying to say that I'm the best. I would class myself as the best procurement person or one of or in that crowd, but having the self awareness to think about where you're. If you have such an evident flaw that I had on the EQ space, that was one I couldn't afford to
yeah,
let go and just let it happen. Whereas, like, if for example, it was like a procurement skill, say I was a weak source, like I found it really hard to find the best suppliers. Like that was just a
yeah,
struggle. I'd be quite happy to park that, but and focus in on being a good negotiator, good on contracts, good on post signature, and actually, to be honest, that's probably where my skills are. They're not in the sourcing uh, phase, but I could not afford to let the EQ stuff go because that would just be a detriment to the rest of my career. So
yeah. It's
it's a good one to
critical.
have.
Actually, you're not like this, but I'll recognise this in you because sometimes you can be quite, um, in a good way, because I know
Mm,
you, but you can be
direct.
quite cutting, yeah, quite direct. So
Yes,
I think about,
it's one that's fed back to me often.
yeah, I think about a year ago, you'd said something along the lines of on one of my posts, and it's funny because we can laugh about it, but
Oh, this is
you
brilliant.
said
I'm
something
going to
along the lines,
record this.
yeah, what, why you said something along the lines of why are you asking people to send your PDF so they
Oh,
can just
yeah.
download it for free. And to be fair,
Yeah.
Daniel, your point was absolutely valid, but the way you'd written it
It's
was
like, you're an
almost
idiot.
like basically you were paraphrasing Tom, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Now it's
That's me in
fine
a
because
nutshell,
I
Tom.
knew. Yeah, it was
With a bit
funny
of
because
comedy
that's
in the background.
yeah, it's funny because me and I knew what you were telling me was true. So it's all I knew that I
Mm.
wasn't being an idiot, but at the same time, I can see how in a kind of business environment that could almost lose
Oh,
stakeholders.
it's
Do you know what I mean?
no, it definitely can, right? And um, it's interesting. I can remember back in the early days. Yeah, I'm probably not going to even share some of these stories for this. I don't think we've got enough time left of this recording. But yeah, like those very direct responses, a lot of people don't know how to handle them. And actually, I'll be really transparent. I'm still super direct like that. But
But that's
um,
partly a
but
strength, isn't it?
nicely,
That's going to be a super strength.
yeah, it probably serves me more good than bad. It's just now
Yeah.
figuring out when, when's the right time
How
to
to apply it
deploy.
and when.
Yeah,
But that
yeah,
comes
like
back to, and I know we've got to finish the conversation for today, but that comes back to self awareness, knowing
that's
that
it.
you have that in your armory and then knowing how and when to best employ it is different
Mm,
than just letting it out. So
yeah.
I know, and I'll be very open with people, my biggest weakness is probably lack of patience. But actually, that lack of patience can be a
Yeah.
superpower within a business when you're wanting to get things done. So I'm not patient with meetings that go on. I'm not patient with people who aren't making decisions, that type of thing. But
Yeah.
I know that if I can kind of control that lack of patience and use it as a superpower, then that's actually a real force within a business. It's when you're not aware that your weakness is your lack of patience,
Yeah.
that's when it becomes a
That's
problem.
right. That was yeah, and that like comes full circle. Like at the start, I was just like that 24/7 with everyone.
Yeah,
And I was like,
yeah,
why is this not working? Like, what do these people want? Like, I'm being direct about what I want. Like, they should surely understand what I need. And I was like, oh wait, they
yeah.
do understand. They just don't like it. And I was like, oh
Yeah.
no, That's interesting. And if you spoke to my mum, she would say that since I was first talking, that I
Yeah,
fundamentally had that directness there. But yeah, like you're right. Like it's just having that skill set then to be like 95% of cases, this is going to upset someone. Go with a different
yeah,
approach. But those 5% cases there, you'll as soon as you do that, you suddenly just change the progress. And you're talking about that lack of patience. That's probably when it
yeah,
will tie in for me, is when I feel like we're not progressing at the rate that we are expected to. And whether that's
yeah,
with the supplier internally, with the procurement team, whether we've got set commitments, SLAs within the business, if we're starting to get to the end of that, my patience comes down and the directness comes out, if it's beneficial still. But if it's still like everyone's doing all that they can, that's great. We don't need
yeah,
to employ that tactic there. But yeah, Tom, that's probably a good one to end
yeah.
on. Absolutely destroying me from my point of directness. So